Okay, well, thanks very much, Chris. I'll just get right into it and share my screen. I'm going to have to get this presentation backed up here, actually. And Yeah, so, as Chris mentioned, the Corporate Mapping Project has been really interested in building knowledge and resources for understanding and responding to the crisis of fossil capitalism, which is both economic and ecological. And with a kind of theory-practice dialectic at the top of mind, our project has delivered a critical analysis of fossil capital's regime of obstruction while helping to build a broad alliance for climate justice in our struggle against corporate power, which is also a race against time. The project's design was shaped by its major funder, Canada's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and its partnership program evolved to allow partnering with nonprofits and in-kind contributions from nonprofits. And so we could create a partnership of universities and four civil society NGOs. Launched in the fall of 2015, the project included in its roster a team of a couple of dozen academic researchers and a dozen community-based researchers and policy analysts. But our team extended to 4 dozen collaborators, most of them active in environmental politics or indigenous, labor, independent media groups, and so on, who could provide advice and also participate in our initiatives. So we leveraged the extensive movement connections of our partners and began to build a community of practice through meetings with activist collaborators in Western Canada. At these gatherings, we asked participants what their needs for knowledge were and how the knowledge we would produce could inform effective movement practice. A few months into this 7-year partnership, we had assembled a network of researchers, progressive policy analysts, and activists sharing a deep concern about corporate power, fossil capital, and climate crisis. So concurrently, we began to roll out a 4-stream research program of research and knowledge mobilization. And the first stream would investigate the structure and dynamics of Canada's fossil capital sector. The second stream would focus on the hegemonic moment, the struggle for hearts and minds, and how the networks and discourses of the fossil capital sector reach into state and civil society. The third stream would consider power wielded and conflict managed along fossil capital commodity chains. And the fourth stream, in the fourth stream, knowledge developed in the first 3 streams would be mobilized. And from Michael Burawoy, we adopted a framing of the project as public sociology. So in contrast to academic elitism and servility to moneyed interests, public sociology addresses publics beyond academe in ways that contribute to discussions integral to democratic process. Although the Corporate Mapping Project would practice traditional public sociology, as in op-eds and media releases, our emphasis has been on what Burawoy calls organic public sociology, working, as he says, in close connection with a visible, thick, active, local, and often counter public. So the project rolled out in 2015, 2016 as a set of sub-projects running in the grooves of these 4 research streams, knit together by a critical political economic and political ecological understanding that incorporated a Gramscian analysis of hegemony. These sub-projects have employed quite a variety of methods and sources and have taken up 5 critical research strategies for social research, which I distinguished in my 2004 book, which is entitled Critical Strategies for Social Research. And as this graphic from the book suggests, anti-systemic movements in the late 60s, early 70s generated new ways of knowing, new needs for knowing, and new interests in knowing the social. In particular, I'm just going to get my little laser pointer out here. We can, we can think about each of these. Dialectical socio-ecological analysis calls attention to the systemic character of social injustice and to the potential for radical renovation of social and ecological relations, the need to unmask ideologies that legitimate status quo arrangements is all part of that. Institutional ethnography, the most coherent and influential research strategy stemming from feminist activism in the 1970s, problematizes everyday actualities to explore how extra-local relations of ruling reach into and shape everyday life. Critical discourse analysis focuses its lens on discourses and texts that constitute our cultural environment and inform our sense of identity and human possibility, showing how the discourses work on us, how they are articulated with other forms of power, and opening space for opposing ideological discourses that put us in our places as subjects of fossil capital. Participatory action research is a critical strategy that combines social investigation, education, and action designed to support those with less power in their organizational or community settings, as Bud Hall has put it. The emphasis is on democratic empowerment through participation in a process of knowledge production and social change. And then finally, what I've called social inquiry as communicative reason strives to produce and mobilize knowledge that can contribute to a revitalized democratic society in which all may participate. This means a reflexive, engaged social science that spreads the critical capacity for social analysis widely among democratic publics, aligning itself with the crucial agents of change. Now, looking back on the corporate mapping project, we're in our last year now, these broad strategies of social inquiry informed our praxeological research agenda, which has emphasized exposing and problematizing corporate power in its multiple modalities to various publics, providing evidence-based ammunition to allies in progressive movements, and offering policy analysis and feasible alternatives based in climate justice. And in this way, the project was designed to foster a change-oriented community of practice. At the core of our mission, we endeavored to produce critical knowledge of fossil capitalism and to mobilize that knowledge among allies and the general public in order to inform effective political practice. So how has all this played out? Well, let me just walk us through these different streams that we invented at the start of the project. So stream one, mapping the socioeconomic organization of fossil capital. I've been particularly engaged in doing some of the research in that stream. And our strategies have really been centered around dialectical socio-ecological analysis, using visual representations that emphasize the relationality of corporate power, how it's structured and networked. Sources and methods for this have included public statistics and proprietary databases like Orbis on corporations and the macroeconomy. We've employed all kinds of social network analysis, of course, to actually map these networks and whether they're elite networks of interlocking directorships or corporate ownership networks and so on. And we've also done some case studies that have been quite important. So just to give you a couple of examples from this stream one, we did a study of the fossil capital elite and its interlocking directorships, how this Calgary-based fossil capital elite hooks up with large corporations based in other Canadian cities, mainly financial institutions in Toronto. See a very strong axis between Toronto finance and Calgary fossil fuel production. Another example is this comparative case analysis of the 5 big tar sands producers and their changing business strategies. And with stream 2, focusing on hegemony, this has proven to be especially productive. Our strategies in this research stream have employed, again, DSA, dialectical social analysis, as well as critical discourse analysis, and institutional ethnography to some extent. And in terms of sources and methods, we've used social network analysis to map the influence structures that reach from the fossil capital sector into the state and civil society. And we've also developed these analyses from public information, corporate annual reports and that kind of thing. Freedom of information requests have been important to expose corrupt practices. Analysis of social media content has been a major feature of this research stream, and a certain amount of field work has also been undertaken. So some examples, it's gonna give you some examples, just a flavor of the kind of work we've been doing. Again, part of this has been mapping out networks of power. So this is a network of lobbying relations where the corporations are in red. The corporations, actually the corporations aren't in red. The designated public office holders are in red. Anyway, basically what we see here is very extensive meetings between the fossil fuel sector and the people who are key people in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, very detailed kind of network analysis of that influence structure. In this study, we looked at using Freedom of Information requests. We showed how the BC Climate Action Plan was actually hatched in the boardroom of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and so really good example of institutional corruption. This study looked at extractivism, the discourses of fossil extractivism that are in the social media networks today, and the major carriers of that discourse. And finally, in a series of critical ethnographies in Saskatchewan, investigating how the power of fossil capital reaches into everyday lives in small towns and in schools, creating local loyalties to the industry. Emily, who will speak soon, has done some really interesting work in this regard. Stream 3 has followed these commodity chains, both as commodity chains, but also as locations for resistance, flashpoints, as we call them. And in this case, again, we've used dialectical social analysis of the structural and strategic analysis of pipelines, but also critical discourse analysis of the flashpoints and how they're represented in news media, and also some institutional ethnography. So the sources for these kinds of studies in Stream 3 have been, to some extent, official statistics on the fossil economy, be able to track these commodity chains in a macroeconomic way. News coverage of protests, for example, the Trans Mountain expansion, and in-depth interviews with divestment activists. So some examples from Stream 3, Dave Hughes, our resident earth scientist, has produced a remarkable series of graphics-rich reports using economic data to explore the contradiction between declared climate targets and actual policy. In a chapter in Regime of Obstruction, Carroll tracks the TMX flashpoint, how popular resistance to that pipeline, refracted through news discourse, quote, has expanded many people's sense of what is possible and what is desirable, as well as pointing to some of the blockages obstructing the needed transition, as Carroll put it. And Emily Beliveau, James Rowe, and Jessica Dempsey have made an innovative move in viewing fossil divestment initiatives as a kind of multi-locational flashpoint that intervenes at the financial moment within commodity chains. Their chapter in Regime of Obstruction is based on in-depth interviews with divestment activists, noting how their predominantly anti-capitalist stance informs a strategy of non-reformist reform. James, Jess, and colleagues have gone on to track the financing of fossil capital through institutional investors like the Canada Pension Plan, which James will speak to today. And then finally, in Stream 4, we've approached our project as public sociology, how can our work help strengthen the public sphere, including the progressive movements that are pressing for change? Strategies here, we practiced public sociology in a variety of ways, but I want to highlight our use of participatory action research in making our data available to activists, journalists, researchers, concerned citizens, and so on. And this meant constructing an information-rich website where most of our research reports and shorter blogs are available for free. The website contains an online database which users can interact with in constructing their own power maps, doing a kind of dialectical sociological analysis of their own. Sources and methods in this research stream, well, mainly what we did was take the data from streams 1 and 2 and integrate it into that interactive website, which was launched in 2019. But we also followed up with case studies of the 50 major climate culprits, if you like, the 50 organizations really at the core of the regime of obstruction, including corporations, but also think tanks and so on and so forth. We did many training sessions recently with activists, helping people develop the skills for researching corporate power. So examples from this fourth stream then, we identified the fossil power top 50, as I mentioned, that are at the core of the regime of obstruction, and we put case studies up on each group up on our website alongside the database. We subdivided our top 50 into emitters, enablers, and legitimators, conveying the theory of power as part of the presentation. The interactive database was developed in collaboration with our US partner Littlesys using Allographer to map the power, as they say. And beginning in 2020, we have delivered dozens of training sessions with activists. The Investigative Corporate Skills Workshop was designed by Zoe Juncker, and I'll provide a link to a recorded version of that workshop that you can check out if you like. And then recent training sessions led by Emily Lowen have engaged with 52 activist groups spanning 7 provinces. 420 activists trained in corporate mapping research skills in total. 2 weeks ago, Emily published her reflections gleaned from this initiative on our website in this article that's there on the slide. Now, since the corporate mapping project started up in 2015, we've added 2 additional research streams, which are very important, I think. One is on investigative journalism, and it presents another angle, if you like, on public sociology. A good example from this stream is the documentary Crude Power, an award-winning documentary that was developed by students in the journalism program at the University of Regina. But we've also, through the Price of Oil project, had investigative articles featured in Toronto Star, Global News, and so on. There's a whole collaborative effort of progressive journalists involved there. Ben Parfit of the CCPA BC has done excellent investigative work on fracking in BC's Northeast. And within Stream 5, we've partnered with several online news media to produce and disseminate research, in particular, National Observer, Tyee, Narwhal, and The Breach. And finally, Stream 6 has focused on Indigenous issues and perspectives. This stream has documented the subaltern status that Indigenous oil patch workers occupy in this study by Angel Aluk and colleagues. Chris Atleo's chapter from Regime of Obstruction reflects on the ideological ambivalence of many Indigenous peoples as currents of resurgence mix with the allure of escaping state-managed poverty via deeper integration into capitalism. Using participatory action research, we've also supported Indigenous-led alternatives to fossil capital. Most recently, in partnership with Indigenous Climate Action, we've been supporting Indigenous-led action research to critique the Pan-Canadian Climate Plan and offer an Indigenous alternative. I must also mention the collaborative book project that Emily Eaton has underway. I think the working title is Writing Relations, Winning a Just Transition in So-Called Canada. And the book is being co-authored by Indigenous and non-Indigenous corporate mapping team members and aligned activist researchers. So I hope that this rather frenetic overview of our project, which has been quite sprawling, there are 40 odd sub-projects in our project. I've only mentioned some of them here. And I've left no time really for reflections on our efficacy as an intervention in critical public sociology. But in a sentence, I would say that our interdisciplinary and praxeological efforts have met with some success in deepening our understanding of the regime of obstruction, in contributing to the climate justice movement, and in offering critical perspectives to mainstream publics. But the regime and the climate crisis comprise such a massive and complex entity, if you like, that it feels like we've been swimming against a very strong storm tide.